All right. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon to those on the East Coast. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our webinar on Getting Lean with SAP TDMS. My name is Jennifer Bowie, and I am your moderator and webinar organizer for today. Today, we will discuss key strategies for leveraging SAP TDMS for efficient test and development environments. This webinar will last about 45 minutes, and we will have a Q&A at the end. The session will also be recorded, and we will email it to you within 24 hours. Talk a little bit about housekeeping items. We'll get those out of the way. If you do have a question, there is a chat box on the bottom left. Go ahead and insert your questions into there and send it to any of the co-presenters, and we will get back to you within the session. Hopefully we'll get to all the questions, but we'll welcome any good questions or any type of questions. So feel free to post those in, and we will get to them. So a little bit about our presenter, Gabe Menching, who is NIMBL's SAP Basis Lead. Gabe is a frequent presenter at SAP conferences around the country. He has 8 years of hands-on technical SAP implementation expertise, specializing in NetWeaver administration, TDMS, and Solution Manager. So I'm going to start things off on 2 slides, a little bit about NIMBL for those who are not familiar with us. Mainly, we pride ourselves on being North America's premier technologist. We have been around since 2009 and are centrally located in Denver, Colorado. In addition, we have multiple customers in both the Fortune 1000 and mid-market. Now, on this next slide, you will see all the services that we support in our practice areas and capabilities. For the purpose of today's webinar, we would like to point out our capabilities in the SAP TDMS space. NIMBL has a practice dedicated to SAP TDMS. We are active bloggers and thought leaders in the space. All right, moving on. We have a lot of great information for you today, and we invite you to ask questions as the session goes on. You can submit questions, as I mentioned earlier, using the chat pane, and we'll try to get back to them. So without further ado, I will now pass the microphone over to Gabe.
Thank you, Jennifer. Again, this is Gabe Menching here with NIMBL. I've been with NIMBL just about 4 years. I'm the basis practice lead, and this is a slide of kind of what we're going to cover in the webinar today. So in this session, we're going to explore the capabilities of SAP's Test Data Migration Server, or TDMS, how you can successfully implement this product in your landscape, and learn about a lot of the features that the product has to offer. Successful implementations can be tricky, so we'll cover some tips and tricks, and also have a little demo. So we'll cover the business process library, kind of a scrambling way we can scramble sensitive data as it comes across, and kind of a step-by-step creating a project. After the demo, we'll wrap up for some questions. But before we get started, we're going to take a small poll to see who on the call actually is currently a TDMS customer, whether you've implemented or not, and if you are not a TDMS customer. Okay, so it looks like about half the crowd is not a TDMS customer, and half already own it, and of that half, half of you have already implemented it and half had not implemented it. We actually find a lot of customers have purchased TDMS as part of some kind of fire sale in the past and never got around to actually implementing it. So we see that a lot, and those are kind of the people we try to help out and guide them through a successful implementation. And it looks like the numbers are changing. We got about 27% of people that have already implemented it and are probably using it. So we'll go on to what is TDMS. So TDMS is basically a data extraction tool. It's going to be getting data out of your production system, getting it into your non-production systems for testing. So your QA systems, your testing client in your development system, building project systems, things of that nature. The time-based reduction feature is going to give you a way to take a time slice of data from your production system, reducing the size of your non-production system. So if you wanted to take, say, 90 days worth of transactional data over to a non-production system, therefore reducing the size of that system, as TDMS is going to give you that capability. We'll also talk about the business process library, and that's giving users the ability to transfer different subsets of data, whether that's master data, transactional data. We can selectively bring that data over from your production system into your non-production systems. And also, TDMS has a scrambling feature that will scramble sensitive data as it comes over from your production system, therefore not exposing that data to through testers in non-production systems or other employees in project systems or things of that nature. So some of the TDMS capabilities. So with TDMS, for the time-based reduction scenario that we talked about, we can reduce the data volume for your non-production system and provide current data for your non-production systems. So for testing purposes, things of that nature, it can automate bringing that non-production data over. When that data does come over, we can scramble and eliminate that sensitive data. So if you wanted to not expose social security numbers, credit card numbers, vendor information, names, addresses, things of that nature, the scrambling functionality in TDMS gives end users the capabilities to achieve that process. So with the time-based reduction, we can automate and reduce the runtime of the data refreshes. SAP's TDMS has a process execution manager that actually will automate a lot of the tasks that are part of each package that is created, and we'll actually go through package and what those tasks look like later on in the demo feature. The allowing functional teams to transfer small subsets of data would be part of the business process library. We'll touch on that in some of the items that are in the business process library and how we can give functional teams the ability to transfer that data. And also reducing the workload of an already strained basis team. So if we can automate a lot of these refresh activities and eliminate some of the post-processing steps that are typically involved in system refreshes, we can reduce the amount of hours that your basis team is putting into those tasks. So kind of a high-level architecture of TDMS. You basically have your source system, your target system, and then what's represented in the middle, which is your central control system. The central control system is typically implemented in the solution manager system, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's actually going to be the kind of the referee, I guess, of the data coming in between the source and target system. So it's going to read all the data from your source system and actually do a selection process of the data. So if we were going to take 90 days worth of data from your production system, it would build that data into a cluster table and then migrate it over to your target system. We also have the flat file feature down at the bottom. So if we had a geographically dispersed landscape where you wanted to dump that information out to a flat file and put it onto a external USB drive, we could go ahead and ship that drive out and send it out to another data center somewhere and then actually import that flat file into our receiver system. So some general recommendations around TDMS. Like I said before, the central control system is typically always located in your solution manager system. A lot of the reason is the WORKCENTER views that are part of TDMS, the projects that are created. TDMS Solution Manager already houses likely your implementation projects, upgrade projects, things of that nature, and so it's a good place to maintain all of your projects. In some high volume scenarios, we would break out the central system out to a separate system that might not be utilized but has TDMS installed. So if you had a separate QA system that wasn't being utilized, we could leverage that as a central system. But as far as the control system, we always recommend that Solution Manager is designated as the control system. Now TDMS is performance is going to be based on the hardware resources that you can give each of these systems in the landscape. So it's based on background processes and dialog processes. So the more background and dialog processes we can give each of these systems, the faster it's going to go. Now we can't just give it all the resources in the world without backing that up with some hardware. So it kind of needs to be in balance. So we'll take another poll and kind of see which use cases might apply to each of the end users that are on the call. So whether that's poor data for testing and training, some data protection issues, systems might be hosted by a third party, so you're paying a price per gig on your storage, or significant data growth of your systems. Also building a HANA prototype environment. So a big one there, poor data and testing for training is typically a big one that we see. So that's one of the big things with TDMS is providing current data to your non-production systems. So we'll talk about that a little more. And it looks like the HANA prototype is right around 33%, and significant growth right around 40%. And around 30% for the data protection issues. So it's great information. So some of these use cases, poor data for testing and training. A lot of the customers out there that have really large systems and want to refresh a test client in their development system are no longer able to use SAP's client copy functionality. So TDMS is kind of a client copy on steroids. So we're able to actually get those client copies done, being how we can bring over a reduced set of data and current data into your development system test client. The data protection issues are going to follow around the scrambling functionality within TDMS. So for any of those test clients or non-production systems, we can scramble all the sensitive information, HR data, if you have employees' information, addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, also credit card information and vendor information. Significant data growth in your SAP systems. A lot of companies are system copying their production system to refresh their non-production systems, such as their QA environments, or building out a project landscape. Being how we can build those production systems, project systems and non-production systems using TDMS, we can actually build out a shell of the production system. That is the shell creation feature within TDMS. So the shell creation is basically the repository items and non-client specific data from your production system. So we can build that project system using a shell of the production system and then bring over all the client dependent config and master data and a subset of transactional data if needed, thereby reducing the size of our non-production systems. Building out an N+1 environment also, using the same technology, we can build out that environment rather quickly and saving disk space. Same for aggressively rolling out systems and regularly standing up project systems. And one of the big things we see a lot is customers are outsourcing their SAP landscapes these days, and they're paying a price per gig on all their SAP systems. So as your database keeps growing and you're constantly refreshing from production, and you've got multiple copies of this huge production database, and you're paying a price per gig, you could see some instant savings by reducing those non-production systems down. And we'll talk about the HANA prototype environments. I'll go on to the next slide. We'll talk more about building a HANA proof of concept. So TDMS is not not dependent on your database platform. It's dependent on the source and the target systems being on the same release. So you could do a transfer from a traditional database to HANA. So we could build a HANA prototype system based on a shell creation of our production system, and then we can transfer over all our client-dependent master data and config data, and then a small subset of transactional data, thereby limiting the size of the HANA appliance that you would need to build out a proof of concept. You can also do this in the cloud, so if you wanted to stand up a small proof of concept HANA system in, say, Amazon Web Services or HANA Enterprise Cloud, you could do that for relatively low cost and bring a small subset of your data over to build out that proof of concept. It's also compatible for HANA to HANA, so building out your non-production HANA systems if you were in a live HANA scenario. And also HANA back to a traditional database if you wanted to build out sandbox systems that you didn't want to pay HANA licensing for. You could definitely do that using your HANA data. So some of the functionality in detail. We talked about time-based reduction scenarios and transfer of master data and customizing data. A lot of those are going to be relevant for most of the business suite. You can see here in HCM we have the ability to transfer PA and PD data over from your production system into your non-production system, so transfer employees, things of that nature. And scrambling out of the box, there's a lot of country-specific scrambling for HCM up to I think it's up to like 30 or 40 countries also. So internationally it's compatible with a lot of the HCM functionality in SAP. So you can see stuff like over in GTS, we don't have a time-based reduction scenario, but we have reduced post-transfer processing. That basically means that it's going to bring the entire GTS client over, but it's less post-processing that you're going to have to do because what TDMS does is it can actually change your logical systems on the fly as it comes over. So typically after you do a system copy, your basis people will have to run BDLS on all the logical systems, which in large environments can sometimes take days or even weeks. So leveraging TDMS to do that logical system conversion reduces that post-processing time frame. So you can see at the top we've got the shell creation, data scrambling, full client transfer, file-based transfer. Also we'll get into like the web interface, how it integrates with Solution Manager. There's also an iPhone and iPad app. So here's just a quick view of the TDMS WorkCenter. So basically if you were to execute the transaction code TDMS, this would be the window that would pop up. We will actually go over this a little bit in more detail during the demo. So you can see here the portfolio of all the different products, building projects, your system landscapes that are part of your projects, and your scrambling workbench and business process library modeler. We'll get into that in a little bit shortly though. So here's a quick view of the SAP GUI package view. So you could still actually maintain your SAP GUI, your TDMS package within SAP GUI. You don't have to use the web interface. You're not limited to just that. So this is more reminiscent of the older version of TDMS, but you still can use it to its full functionality. TDMS also has a FIORI app. This was released right about a year ago, and I think a newer version just came out recently, or a newer patch. But if anybody's familiar with FIORI, it's basically you're going to have front-end components and back-end components to get this app working. So the front-end components are going to be for your gateway system, and the back-end components are going to be for the Solution Manager control system or central system. So now we'll touch on the business process library a little bit. Here's some items from the business process library. This is actually growing here and there with support packages. So this gives users an idea of the selective data that they could bring over from their production system into their non-production system. So if somebody wanted to bring over a series of sales orders or purchase orders, things of that nature, you have that capability, specific master data. So we'll go into also the business process library modeler. So SAP delivered BPLs are not modifiable, but we can copy those out for customizing. Not all standard BPL objects are always ready to use. SAP recommends verifying that the hierarchy of the BPL object you want to use contains the required tables. If all the required tables are not present, we can copy that out to a custom BPL and modify it with any tables that are not part of that. So here's a quick view of an existing BPL object. So in here we have a root table, which is kind of the starter table that specifies the reduction criteria for the BPL object. Data selection for the BPL object starts with the root table. Then we have the tables that are involved. Database tables that are transferred as part of the selected BPL object, and then sub-objects. Sub-objects are BPL objects that are included with another BPL object. So a sub-object can be transferred separately or can be included with another BPL object. So you can see here we have sub-objects for change documents and standard text and new GL objects. So those sub-objects can actually be transferred. They are their own BPL objects, but you can see here they're represented as part of the accounting document BPL object. So now we're going to step into scrambling, and kind of as part of the scrambling, I'm going to quickly walk through step-by-step creation of a project within Solution Manager, creating a TDMS project, and creating a package. This will be covering scrambling, so we'll also get into different scrambling scenarios. So if you were, say, a new TDMS customer, you could perform your scrambling in your standalone system. So say you wanted to scramble system in your existing QA environment, TDMS has the ability to scramble data in a standalone system, not necessarily while it's doing a transfer of data from one system to another. It can scramble that system in a standalone system. It can also be implemented as part of a time-based reduction scenario. So as that data is coming over prior to leaving the production system or whatever the sender system is, it'll scramble the data. And also as part of a BPL transfer, we can also apply scrambling rules to those. So this is kind of a high-level architecture of data scrambling. You can see in the source system, the scrambled data, the sender data that's going to be transferred over is stored in that cluster table, and it's actually scrambled there prior to leaving the system. So your sensitive data does not leave your production environment. Also, data in cluster tables can also be scrambled. So even if you were doing the flat file scenario where you were exporting that data off to another data center, when it gets to that flat file, that sensitive data has already been scrambled. So we're just quickly going to go through kind of a typical project creation. In this scenario, this project is going to be for a scrambling project. So from the TDMS WorkCenter, we're going to click the start page and select projects. So in projects, we're going to create a new project. So we'll click on new. That's going to bring us into the project composer. We're going to give a description of the project. We're going to select a project template for the project. So here I've created a Scramble standalone project template. So we'll be scrambling data in a standalone system. So we can see here the solutions that are part of this project template is the standalone scrambling solution from TDMS. So we'll select Finish, and now our project has been created. Now before we could do anything with this project, a landscape will need to be assigned to the project so it actually knows which systems are going to be part of this project. So you can see here we have just a central system and an execution system. So the execution system is the system where we're going to be scrambling the data. This is specific to whatever scenario you're going to be running. So if you were doing a time-based reduction scenario, you would have a landscape that has a sender system, a receiver system, a central system, and a control system. But for the sake of a standalone scrambling scenario, we just have the two. So once we have added a landscape, it'll activate the Create Package button here on the right-hand side. So once we hit that Create Package, it's going to take us to the next slide, which is basically a list of the package that's going to have a number of automated and manual tasks. So here's a look at our package. Each activity is executed in the package. We can go to an extended or a standard view. There's going to be checks for optional tasks. Optional tasks are just that. They are optional, so you don't necessarily have to execute all of them. But we would typically go down this list and select each of the check marks, executing each one. Now, one of the manual activities is defining our scrambling rules. So in the scrambling workbench, we can create all our scrambling rules and test them out. And here's where we can actually test them in a live system. So here we're going to copy them from the WorkCenter into our package. We're going to copy the enhanced scrambling objects. This is going to copy the scrambling objects into our package. So when we see here all the rules are being copied from the WorkCenter into our package, and we could see here under vendor, I have 4 different custom scrambling objects. And for this rule, I'm just going to activate the one, which is vendor name. So this scenario is going to actually scramble the vendor names in the receiver system. So we would execute the remaining automated steps, and then we would go into our execution system and validate that the scrambling rule actually did what it was supposed to do. So we can kind of take a look at some of the tables in question, see before and see after, and make sure everything was scrambled successfully. So now we'll get into some tips and tricks for implementing and running TDMS. So some implementation considerations to take into account. The 2 components for TDMS are the DMIS and DMIS CNT, which is DMIS content. These 2 add-ons are what make up the TDMS product. Now, if anybody's familiar with HANA and a sidecar approach like SLT, this is also the same technology that's used in TDMS. Also LT, landscape transformation. All 3 of these products use these 2 add-on components. So if anybody's familiar with those other products, it is the same add-on in your systems. So if you are using these other products, when you patch these components, you are patching each of these products. So that's something to take into account if you are using those. These components are the same on every system that is part of the TDMS process. So your sender system, your receiver system, your solution manager system. It's all going to have these same components. You always want to patch to the latest support package of the DMIS components. The current support pack is at 8. And also remember that new support packages include fixes and also enhancements to TDMS. So if you're looking for new scrambling functionality, things of that nature, new BPL objects that are coming out, those are going to be part of TDMS support packs. So also, these are a list of notes that are relevant after you've installed your add-on components. Basically, these are all prerequisite notes. You need to go through and review each of these notes, and based on your support package level, they will have a series of prerequisite notes that need to be implemented in your system. They'll be defined by whether they need to be in the sender system, the receiver system, or central control. So these notes are pretty crucial to read through and fully implement all the recommendations prior to doing any activities in TDMS. So you can see here one's a composite note for TDMS and one's a basis composite note. And then for scrambling and BPL scenarios, there are collective notes also. So I highly recommend to review each of these and implement all of the prerequisites in your system prior to doing anything with TDMS. So some landscape recommendations. Using a central system we talked about for better performance. Say your solution manager system doesn't really have the performance, the hardware resources, or it's being used for other things such as CHARM or ITSM or technical monitoring, stuff like that. We can offload some of that workload to a separate system, leveraging that as our central system. So also if we're doing multiple packages at the same time, the next slide will actually show us how this can alleviate some of the load. You can also leverage multiple central systems if you want for multiple runs. So, and also the more processes that we can assign to each of the systems in the landscape, the faster this is going to go. I've seen scenarios where we've leveraged 30 processes and achieved about an 800 gig transfer in about 10 hours. We always want to disable archive logging or transaction logging in the receiver system. That takes off a lot of the performance. We get a lot of added performance out of that. There's also this note here for different parameters to configure in your system for TDMS. So if we're going to do multiple transfers in parallel, this is a good slide that SAP has published. This shows the TDMS control system, which is Solution Manager. And on the left-hand side, we have a package for production. At the bottom, we have a package for BW and a package for CRM. So these are all going at the same time, and we're leveraging separate central instances for each of these packages. So this gives you an idea of how we can offload that central processing from the Solution Manager system. So I've also done scenarios where we can have one central system for multiple packages. That central system just has to really have the resources to be able to accommodate that load. Some general parameter settings from the note that was in the previous slide. So the RDISP max runtime is the maximum dialog runtime of a process. So that might even need to be adjusted higher than that. That's what SAP recommends, but in some scenarios I've seen it where we've had to put it a little higher. The recording client, that says the table change logging in the system, in the receiver system, we want to disable this during the execution. This really impairs performance and would require considerable additional memory resources at the database level. And the RDISP BTC time, which is the start interval for the background job schedule. So we want it to run every 60 seconds, which is default, so just make sure that hasn't been adjusted in your scenario. Some performance considerations. The client deletion consumes the allocated processes that are assigned to the package in your control and receiver system. The data selection is going to take those processes in the central and sender system, and the data transfer is going to use these processes in the central and the receiver system, and also has an impact on the sender system, basically reading from the database. So another performance consideration to take into account is that some tasks can be ran in parallel. So for instance, you could be doing a client deletion in the receiver system and doing a data selection in the sender system at the same time. You just need to take into account that Since those each are using the allocated set of processes, you could potentially be doubling up the processes that are required in one of the systems. So if 15 processes for one task are going to be part of the process, then that's going to be 30 processes total that could potentially be consumed in one system. Also, there is a composite SAP note for TDMS performance. Some data deletion techniques that are used by TDMS. There is an array delete functionality which deletes the data in the target system by selectively deleting data just from that client. This actually can take longer than the drop insert method when the client is very large. If this was a brand new client that you stood up, this would actually delete that relatively quickly. So the drop insert technique is actually going to drop the entire table and actually insert back in the other clients that aren't part of this transfer. This technique is much faster for the larger clients, also for single client systems. So maintaining consistency is key when you're doing multiple runs. You want to make sure that you achieve consistency by doing data selection at the same time, and you always want to do it in a quiet period. So off hours, if you're a 24-hour shop and you can't get to where the data selection can be ran during a quiet period in your system, we can look at utilizing maybe snapshot capabilities in your landscape if you have storage snapshotting capabilities or virtualization snapshotting capabilities. Or we can also just system copy production to QA and use QA as a source if needed. You can also consider running the job over a weekend if you're not utilizing the system over a weekend. The packages for each of the systems should be executed at the same time. So if you're doing a CRM, SCM, and ERP package, we're going to do data selection on those systems all at the same time, or try to minimize the gap as much as possible. So some ERP time-based reduction tips. ERP time slice date should be used with the other systems in the project. So we're going to use the same time slice date in the project, and we'll have multiple packages. And we'll want to make sure each of those packages for, say, CRM, BW, are all leveraging the same package date. So material ledger being active and being used in your system can lead to some issues if changes are made in the system during the data selection. So if that is active and being used, that's something to take into account. So in regards to SAP Financials, TDMS only selects all the cleared items for a posting date or change date that is the same or greater than the specified time slice date. So it's only going to bring over those cleared items. For anything that you want to transfer for open items, you can reference that note there that's in this slide. So some BW reduction tips. Ensuring data consistency, you want to stop all the loads into your BW system, whether they're from ECC or CRM. Ensure that all those process chains and real-time data acquisition daemons are stopped. There's a note here that can help you with stopping those data loads if you need any assistance with that. Also, locking the sender system, locking all the users out of the sender system to avoid any manual data loads. There's also a activity in the migration process tree for the time-based reduction in BW that will lock the users for you. So CRM time-based reduction tips. Emptying the BDOC queues in the sender system before starting the data selection process is going to be key. This will limit the change in the CRM test system. So keeping that high level of consistency. Also the same scenario across all of them, specifying the same time slice date. SCM time-based reduction tips. We're going to run the data selection when there's a minimum data exchange between SCM and the ERP system. Also leveraging the same selection time as the ERP system for data selection. Also using standard SCM transactions for troubleshooting inconsistencies, executing those transactions and doing consistency checks and resolving any inconsistencies are going to be helpful. So troubleshooters within your package. When you are going through a time-based reduction scenario or a BPL transfer or anything, a lot of the most important activities are going to have troubleshooting activities. If you're to run into any issues, this is where we can address any of these issues using this troubleshooter. So you can see here, writing to the database aborted with duplicate key is a big one. After a database transfer, you're going to have maybe 2 or 3 duplicate key entries, and we can change the write behavior there to address those issues. So always remember to execute your troubleshooters. RFC synchronization can become an issue. If you got multiple things running at the same time, these RFCs can get overloaded and become out of sync. So if you experience a failure in one step, always go back and check your RFCs, make sure they're in sync, because that can lead to stopping tasks in the system. Other tips and tricks, we talked about leveraging a separate central system for doing multiple runs. Always want to execute 2 runs into a sandbox to work out any bugs. So if you're doing a fresh TDMS implementation, don't just jump into using production as a sender and trying to update QA. Do a couple test runs into a sandbox and work out any bugs. The more processes you can dedicate to the package, the faster it's going to go. Make sure you have the hardware resources to accommodate those processes. After any issues in the system, check the RFC status. Like I said, if anything fails, go ahead and check the RFC status, make sure they're synchronized. Always use your troubleshooters to address any issues. And you want to monitor table spaces and have auto extend enabled on some of them to prevent them from filling up during a transfer. Also monitoring archive logs in the sender system during data selection. So the data selection is going to cause your production system to grow. It's going to be rather low, but it is going to grow a little bit, so you want to monitor those archive logs. So now we'll get into a quick demo. Run a little bit behind. I'll try to jump through this a little bit. All right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. So quick run through. This is the TDMS homepage. So when you execute the transaction TDMS in SAP GUI, it's going to launch this homepage. You can see here the different projects that I'm a part of. We've got some HCM projects, some time-based reduction, shell creation for one of our ERP systems. So this is just a NIMBL demo system that we have. So we have multiple ERP IDES systems that we use for sender and receiver systems. So these are my packages on the right-hand side that have been created as part of my project. So you can see here we have this time-based reduction for ERP and a shell creation for ERP. Prior to starting the webinar, I actually went off and kicked off this time-based reduction, and it looks like my transfer has failed. But you can see here, this is what the package looks like, and we're gonna restart that data transfer real quick. But you can see here all these tasks that are comprised as part of a time-based reduction scenario. But we have these package settings. This is where we're going to basically set up everything. We can come here to the assign logical system names for the receiver system. So this is where we'll do logical systems for the source and how they are changed in the receiver system. So this is essentially executing BDLS for us. Most of these steps are all automated, and we can use this process execution manager to automate executing all those. The system analysis, basically a lot of analysis jobs that are ran for analyzing the source and target systems. Those are all automated. And then the data transfer portion of the package is where we're going to have the bulk of all the workload. So starting data selection for our sender system, doing the data transfer. These are what are going to take the longest. And depending on your system, we can work on ways to reduce the time frame of those transfers. So back to the TDMS home screen, we can go into the portfolio. This gives users a way to just kind of explore what the capabilities of TDMS are. So if you go into any of these, application-based transfer, for instance, let me reload this. You can see here it opens up the SAP help on the right-hand side. So if you wanted to look into, say, object-based reduction for industries, if we were, say, a utilities company, we could go in here and we could have this open the SAP help on the application-based transfer within the SAP help portal. So that's a nice tool. Also, if you wanted to look at the business process library objects without going into the modeler, this is going to give you a list of all the different customer data, master data, the different processes and transactional data that you can transfer as part of your BPL scenarios. Project templates, we can create project templates for all the different projects that we have. SAP delivers a lot of SAP delivered templates, and you can use those or copy them off to your own. Also the data scrambling workbench, we can look at the different data scrambling functionality that's out there and kind of explore that. So another thing I wanted to show was a quick tool that we can leverage in our central system. This is transaction DMC mon. So this is where we can actually monitor a transfer as it's going. So here in the relevant tables, this is going to tell me all the tables that are relevant to this transfer. Since I started this before, is this having a hard time refreshing? Okay. I guess my screen is having a hard time refreshing, so I'll wait for this to catch up. Okay, it looks like everybody can see this again. So these are the, again, this is the DMC mon transaction. And we could see here the number of tables that are part of our transfer. Here we have 29,516 tables. Right now it's currently processing 3 of them, and it actually tells me which 3 are processing. We can see which ones are generated and which ones are not, which ones are loaded and which are not calculated. So I'm actually still running the selection process and the data transfer at the same time. So if I double click on one of these, it's going to populate all the relevant information. So number of tables, it's going to pull over all the tables. And I can actually edit the transfer behavior and sequence number here from this transaction if I wanted to. Also, let's go over to some of the expert functions, so performance monitoring. Let's see if we're capturing some data there. So because I didn't want this to finish relatively quickly, I only put like 2 processes to have it transferring data, so it should be going relatively slow. Sorry, this is taking a little bit to load. So when this does load, it's going to tell us, how many records have been transferred, how many records are left in the transfer, and it's going to give me kind of a guesstimate of when it's going to finish. Also, there's a job that you can have to run this every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, so it'll give you the total number of records processed in that interval. So here this is just loaded. And here you see at the bottom the start of the transfer, when it was started, when it forecasts when it's going to end based on the number of records processed. So rows left to be processed are at 60 million. You can see there's objects in error and objects in process. We can go over to our history And this should be, so you could see here in this 5-minute interval, it processed 467,857 records. And we can see the throughput. Unfortunately, our transfer had died, and so we got zeros across the board on the other one. But we can also go over here to the current process and see the processes, the tables that are currently in process. So, sorry, the things went a little bit over. We've got about 10 minutes left to answer some questions. Let me go back to the slide deck. And so here is where you can find some more information. The TDMS 4.0 on SAP Help Portal, the TDMS Wiki on SCN, the TDMS page on SCN that's dedicated to Test Data Migration Server, and also there's a time-based reduction overview on SCN, so it can give you an overview of that process. 7 key points to take home. Scrambling data can be done in your existing system. It doesn't have to be implemented during a transfer. You want to make sure your hardware can support the processes that are being configured in your package. And scrambling during a transfer is done in your sender system, so you're not exposing your system to sensitive data. Performance is going to be dependent on your hardware resources, and the TDMS components are the same on each of the systems in the landscape. Number of your basis post-processing steps are no longer needed, so the transfer is not going to touch your users, your RFCs, your partner profiles, any of that information. So a lot of the basis activities are no longer needed for post-processing. And always utilize your troubleshooters to overcome any issues. So in the questions, let's address Diane Ramirez. About how much time does TDMS reduce a system copy from prod to QAS? Currently takes about 2.5 days to do a system copy of a 2 gigabyte system. I think that's probably a typo, and it's probably a 2 terabyte system. It can reduce it significantly depending on the time slice that you're going to take, or if you're just going to do a full client. I've seen about a 4 terabyte system be reduced, getting that done in about a day and a half. And that reduces all of the post-processing also, so you're no longer running BDLS afterwards, which on a 2 terabyte system could take a long time. So depending on your system, if it's multiple clients and it has to delete one of those, it can usually go relatively quickly. Are there any other questions? Okay.
All right. If anyone has any other questions, please put them through right now, and we'll make sure that we get those answered. And just wanted to thank Gabe for the great information he provided today. If you are interested in receiving additional information, you can click on the Raise My Hand button in the control panel, or you can also contact Gabe directly. His contact information is available on the slide here. Again, we'll be sending this out, copy the slides, and a link to watch the webinar on demand that you can review later or send to your team. And lastly, upcoming webinars. Here's a list of webinars that we have planned. First one will be on Solution Manager and technical monitoring. And then in July we have one on if you're considering migrating over SAP HANA and want to learn some best practices on test management. That one's going to be on July 23rd. And the last one is more towards security with SAP applications. We'll be talking about Fortify by SAP Fortify by HP and a couple other tools available to you guys. And with that, that brings us to the conclusion of the webinar. If you could, please complete a survey at the end here. Once we complete or end the webinar, a survey will pop up. That helps us ensure that we're providing you with the right content, and we'd love to hear suggestions for additional topics. Oh, actually, we have one more question here. How does SAP charge for SAP TDMS? If you wanted to use it for multiple systems, do you have to pay more?
So the way SAP licenses TDMS is by the size of your production database. So say if your production database is a terabyte, it licenses it in 300 gig increments. You don't have to pay more for using it for multiple systems. So once you're licensed for TDMS, you can use it to refresh any of your non-production systems. The licensing is just done by the size of your production database. Are there any other questions?
All right. No, I think we're good. I'll give you 3 minutes back to your day. And I wanted to thank everyone for joining us again. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a shout, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.